Okay, welcome back, everyone. If you're just joining us, I'm Janice Omedeki. I'm CEO and founder of the Mentor Method, an enterprise SaaS platform focused on retention and inclusion of underrepresented talent. I'm also your MC and track advisor for the social impact track for Austin Startup Week. Really excited to have you. Today we'll have 3 sessions. Our first one will be on Austin's social and environmental impact startup ecosystem, brought to you by Bob Bridge, Executive Director at Southwest Angel Network, and Bart Vaughn, founder at Root Aspen. Welcome, guys. Looking forward to this.
Hey, Janice. Good to see you again.
Likewise.
So share my screen. Can we bring up my screen? Do I need to do something here? There we go. Well, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. Bart and I have been friends for quite a while, and we both have a lot of experience with startup companies and impact in various ways. So I will be speaking on social impact primarily, and Bart will be speaking about environmental impact. My own background, I spent 10 years in big companies and various kinds of marketing and technical roles, then did 30 years of high-tech startups here in Austin, and did things that took like $20 million to get the first product out the door, like semiconductors, and wasn't going to turn that crank again. And so I put together the Southwest Angel Network starting in 2016. And Bart, maybe a short intro from you.
Yeah, so I've been around the startup space for about 15 years, mostly anchored out of the Austin Technology Incubator. Prior life was strategy consulting, a lot of big oil and gas based in Houston. So it's great to kind of now be focused on environment to balance out that part of my life. Otherwise, what I love to do is just stand at whiteboards with founders and help them solve their next challenge. My own startups were in what's now called AI, but really just big data, machine learning. But now I'm starting to take some of that background and focus it more on climate change. So I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. So how do we define social impact? And our angel network has 49 angels. And I could probably say there's probably 49 different ideas of exactly what impact means. So here's this word cloud with lots of different ideas. Some of these are sort of industry specific, like education and health and hunger. Others are more sort of social inequality related in terms of underrepresented groups or women or dealing with inequality. And so, as we go through this time today, I'm trying to include all those kinds of concepts. Some angel networks are women-led, investing in women-led companies. Women angels investing in women-led companies. There's an angel network in Vermont who says our impact is to try to bring jobs back to Vermont because all our jobs are leaving the state. And so, be very interested to hear what your ideas on and what is impact and what's not. Maybe we'll cover that during the Q&A. So it's a hard thing to pin down. We'll talk some more about how the Southwest Angel Network feels about that. But here's a really interesting resource, which is from the United Nations. They've developed these Sustainable Development Goals. And this set of 17 goals are recognized around the world as important goals. Let me make my phone be quiet here. So some companies or some teams actually may address more than one of these. So if you're doing some environmental things, it may also help with health because you're cleaning up the environment. And so we ask our companies who apply to us to identify which of the sustainable development goals they're playing in. So impact is hard for a startup company to show that they really are going to have meaningful, measurable impact because they're early to market. They're not in the market necessarily yet if we're at the seed level. We want to see as much evidence that they'll be doing social good, but it's hard for them to present the evidence because they're not yet delivering their products or service. So we take a step back from that and say, okay, what's the most basic test we can apply to see if we think a company is a social impact company? And that is the primary business mission really focused on impact? We had an example of a company who applied to us that had a platform that could be used to recruit employees. And they'd built into this platform all the best practices that Google and Facebook uses, making that platform available to all the hiring agencies and groups in the world, in the US. And they said, oh, by the way, because you can use this to hire diverse employees, we're an impact company. And we said, well, not really. You're a hiring platform company that might be used for social good, but you aren't a social impact company. And so we also like to see that mission reflected in the homepage. So, that's sort of a first level as to how we think about who is in doing social impact. So with that background, I'm going to transition over to some of the ecosystem discussions. Impact can be either done through a nonprofit or a for-profit startup. And I'm going to show on this slide and next slides the kind of organizations are involved with startup impact in Austin, really focusing not so much on the clean tech environmental side as on social impact. And on the nonprofit side, maybe starting from the right, funding sources. Austin Community Foundation has a number of funds which are focused on various types of social impact. And so they're certainly interesting to go understand if you're looking for funding. They have one, I think, on women funded companies, one on community development. Mission Capital and the Social Venture Partner Program is really big, maybe the biggest name in town in terms of supporting nonprofits. They do a lot of consulting work for nonprofits. They help nonprofits find staff. And they also run various types of accelerator type programs, including support from their social venture partner group, which also provides some capital for a select number of nonprofits. And of course, a big name in town here is Notley, who has a myriad of programs. The next session after ours will have Notley speakers, so I suggest you stick around for that. But they have a very large team and do a lot to support nonprofits here in town. There are some accelerators that will support nonprofits. Impact Hub runs programs. They have done programs recently on workforce development, affordable housing. Mass Challenge supports both for-profit and nonprofit companies and have a strong interest in social impact. It's not a requirement to go through Mass Challenge, but the Austin program is really strong. And then on the co-work space, Impact Hub has co-work space, and Relay, which is part of Notley, has some co-work space really focused on impact companies. So on the for-profit side, starting from the right, going to the left again, Austin Food Shed Investors is an angel network really focused on food production primarily. And they have a really interesting investment models they've created. Beam is a brand new angel network here in town, hooray, hooray, focused on women-led companies. So their impact is supporting diversity. The Southwest Angel Network, which I founded and run, we'll talk more about later. And then True Wealth Ventures is an Austin-based venture capital firm run by women, investing in women-led companies who are delivering products and services for women marketplaces. Women, make up the majority of the buying decision in the US. And so they're trying to capitalize on companies that are servicing the interests and needs of women purchasers. Accelerators, Austin Technology Incubator, is the oldest incubator here in Austin, been around, Bart, maybe 35 years, 30 years, something like that. And
we're sitting at just over 30 years now.
And they now have focused on primarily clean tech and healthcare. They figure there's plenty of accelerators here in town for SaaS startups. And so, the healthcare fits really well into social impact, improving healthcare outcomes. Div Inc. is a wonderful accelerator here in town that supports diverse founders, either women or people of color. Mass Challenge I mentioned before. Tarmac TX, which Bart's helping to run, is an environmentally focused impact accelerator. Tech Ranch doesn't have explicit programs on impact, but Kevin Coyne, their founder, has a deep commitment to doing social good. And then maybe one you don't know about, the Unincubator. This is a incubator aimed at people trying to do ideation, the earliest stage. And they're very supportive of people of color, people, women, and people of all sexual orientations and gender expressions. So it was a very inclusive, friendly kind of environment to be in. Relay, again, has co-work space. And there's some networking groups, really interesting ones. Black Women Talk Tech here in town that does a lot of networking for Black entrepreneur women. And Women in Austin has programs for women. And they're basically the seed, the parent of Beam. So the Southwest Angel Network, we really focus on the social side, people trying to address inequalities in health and education, economic achievement, things like that, and then people are trying to mitigate environmental damage and promote clean energy. So we are very supportive of diverse teams. It's not required or sufficient to get funding to be a diverse founder, but half our investments have been to such diverse teams. And we've been now operating for almost 5 years. We have 49 angels now, and we've made $5.5 million investments in 23 companies. And just announced a Dallas chapter for our network. You can see more information there at that URL. 2 more slides, and I'll turn it over to Bart, and then we'll get to questions. Universities, St. Ed's and UT both have a strong interest in social impact, social good. St. Edward's was founded by a Catholic group that really has a mission of promoting social justice. That's a key part of their DNA. They're also a largely Hispanic serving institution, so they have this big diversity, emphasis. And the School of Business has as one of its goals promoting, social impact through their school and with partner organizations outside of the university. So they run various types of entrepreneurial programs and classes that all have sort of a general focus, but also include tracks on social impact. And then UT has lots of activities. In Maccombs, there is the Social Innovation Initiative, SII. And you can see they have 6 different programs there focused on social impact, including various types of student accelerator, business plan competitions, various types of programs for graduate students and undergraduates, a group, sustainability investment group that's trying to act like a venture group to invest money. And then they also have Ruben Cantu, runs the Office of Inclusive Innovation and Entrepreneurship, who's helping diverse students successfully become entrepreneurs and get funded. So I ran through that really quickly, but that's on the social side. That's the kind of things we see going on in Austin. I'll turn it over to Bart at this point. So I'm stopping my screen share.
Great. There we go. Very good. So, Bob, thank you. I'll cover the environmental side of the ecosystem. Give a little background. My work today, I get asked this all the time. What do I do? My day job is actually mostly at the University of Texas, where I run the SEAL Accelerator. As part of the Blackstone Launchpad program, where we have 10 or 12 of the best startups that are emerging from the university each year go through that. Another legacy project is BuildSec Foundry, which is a nonprofit venture studio focused on helping primarily veterans of the military and intelligence community launch cybersecurity startups. It's equally based in Austin and San Antonio. And kind of the other three projects are all focused on climate change. Tarmac on the environmental startups. I'll talk more about that. Pecan Street, I'm helping to run a working group focused on applying artificial intelligence to accelerate soil carbon sequestration. We can dive more into that. And another new project is under the project name Root Aspen, trying to figure out how to route carbon offset credits to accelerate the adoption of potentially scalable carbon impact technologies. And so I'm trying to figure out multiple ways to tackle the environmental side. A huge framing trends for the environmental conversation for startups or programs. The good news is that in big public companies, ESG doesn't cut it anymore. Just kind of hand waving to be environmentally friendly is no longer credible. And companies are getting kicked out of funds and off indexes because of the carbon emissions. And there's becoming significant leverage from major investors to focus on environmental impacts. What they're doing is on scope 2, which is basically if a company buys electricity from the electrical grid, scope 2 emissions are the carbon that's emitted because of that electricity purchase. And so most big companies are beginning to quickly purchase solar powered or wind energy, renewable energy, to eliminate all their scope 2 emissions. The next one they're focusing on is scope 1, which really focuses on the emissions and environmental impacts from their operations, from whatever they manufacture and how they deliver it. That's much harder, particularly for some heavy industry companies. And the one that's really going to get tackled last is called scope 3. And that's when you are all the carbon emissions, environmental impacts from your supply chain. And so large companies, of course, want to be green and they want to have that positive perception in the world. But it's really hard to force environmental changes back up your supply chain. Big companies like Walmart can do that, but not many others can. The other, as part of that scope 2 and 3 issues, customers of environmental solutions need stuff that actually directly fix the problem, prevent emissions, or can fix the damage being caused. And that means the solutions need to be quantifiable. So the crunchier you can get on per gallon or ton of carbon or anything like that, it's critical at this point. Fortunately, we all know environmental issues are intertwined with everything else in life, everything else going on in the world. Increased focus on equity and jobs and health, that is becoming a major part of the conversation instead of an afterthought. And lastly, a lot of this is, of course, being driven by generational changes. The youth versus older folks is just a completely different conversation and tolerance for what's happening to the world. That's great. So for the startups, that of course means your solutions have to have quantifiable benefit. You have to anticipate all the secondary effects and have pre-address them in your solution or your service. There is a bias towards this hot swap notion, meaning just take one machine out, put a new machine in. That way the rest of the supply chain or value chain doesn't have to get changed. That is incredibly hard versus maybe a fundamental new approach, but it's where a lot of potential customers for these types of solutions have their mindsets. As Bob talked about, there's an increasing landscape for investment. And so MRI is mission-related investments and PRI is program-related investments. On the program side, that means foundations are increasingly able to invest in startups, which brings on billions and billions of dollars of potential investment for the environmental impact sector. This talent advantage one, of course, the youth are, younger folks are very focused on this, but more and more I'm seeing experienced industry veterans kind of taking the time out in their 40s or 50s saying, if I'm going to spend the next 20, 30 years working, I want it to have meaning. And so increasingly they're looking for opportunities to tackle climate change in some way or any other social issues that Bob mentioned. And so you're starting to get an incredible flow of national level talent into the sector. On the startup side, you saw Bob mention some of the startup programs. I'll talk through a few more that are built just for this niche. And also more encouraging is that a lot of the existing infrastructure for startups is very happy to work with environmental impact startups. Here in Austin, Capital Factory has numerous ones in their portfolio. Techstars nationally and globally has a big push for them. And they just released a report that showed all the different types of environmental impact startups that they're working with through all of their new programs. And I believe even all the impact startups outperform the rest of the portfolio. And so all those types of mainstream programs are increasingly looking for the types of startups that we're talking about. Here in Austin, Bob mentioned many of these. I just want to highlight some of them again. ATI's majority of it at this point is focused on environmental impact. Tarmac is 100%. Mass Challenge, you see good flow through there. Mentioned Techstars. The reverse pitch is put on by the City of Austin's Reclamation Department, where they find materials that are going to the dump way too often. And they put on competition for entrepreneurs to come try to find how to do something better and divert those materials to reuse them. I think 3 or 4 of the companies in Tarmac came out of that pitch competition. And lastly, I'll call it Naturally Austin as well. They're trying to figure out how to drive a wave of naturally friendly and sourced products, CPG products. More broadly, looking at, on the right-hand side are other programs around Texas I just want to call out because I see Austin-based companies get into them all the time. EarthX up in Dallas, Rice Alliance, Rice in general has some fantastic programs. They just launched a new clean energy incubator. Greentown Labs is opened up in Houston in 2021. Now it's a program that launched in Boston. They work with hundreds of startups. Think of them as a Capital Factory scale program, but for clean energy and clean tech startups. And lastly, several companies have gotten early stage funding through A&M's New Ventures competition. So please think about all the Texas-wide opportunities. Spending a little bit of time on Tarmac, so this is highly focused on that. Get to introduce the 8 members for the current cohort, all early stage, doing some fascinating things. A few patents are already in this. Some have revenue with current traction. Hopefully they'll be able to join kind of the select alumni that you see down below. Helper Bees raised a big round recently. Yawn has been acquired. Gardenia is getting traction and ramping up. Hopefully many of those are well-known logos at this point throughout the Austin ecosystem. So we're really proud of the alumni and the impacts they're having after they've graduated. I went out and asked some of the other companies the programs to send slides. So ATI sent a couple slides, 30-year-old. It tends to focus on deep tech, harder tech, not necessarily SaaS software anymore or mobile software. I think in the last 12, 15 years, probably $1.5 to $2 billion of money or funding has been raised. So there's 1.7. So that's been significant scale opportunities. For environmental side, the one place to go, they work on energy, circular economy, food and ag tech, mobility, and water. And many of those are interrelated. If you solve one problem in water, there's a good chance you may be causing a problem in food or ag, or vice versa. And so having a community that can be aware of interdependencies between all these topics can be critical. Also want to highlight Pecan Street. It's a nonprofit founded over 10 years ago to focus on removing data as a barrier to any climate solutions. They do work on a lot of residential energy, water, electric vehicles, vehicle to grid. And as I mentioned, they're launching a new program on soil, specifically soil carbon sequestration. That's perhaps the biggest lever we have to draw carbon out of the atmosphere. And so there's a lot of emerging soil science and attention being applied to how to improve that. And critically, pay farmers and ranchers for those environmental services. So this could be a great win-win where struggling farmers can find a new revenue source as we battle climate change and try to heal the environment. So with that, I think that's the last slide that got sent through. I'll pause and maybe we can shift back to any Q&A if anything has come through.
Right, there's a couple of questions out there. Tom Price asked about the exit strategies that the Angel Network considers for the 23 funded companies. So, for the majority of the companies, we expect them to get to the point where they can be acquired. And so we anticipate they need probably anywhere from $20 to $30 million in revenue to be acquirable, to be interesting to someone who wants to acquire them. And so that is the primary exit we see. In some cases, we've done some non-equity investments that don't require an exit. We don't expect these impact companies to get into an IPO. This is not unicorn land for these companies. But we've done some revenue-based financing where we will give money to a company as sort of a loan. It's not exactly a loan. And they agree to repay us a certain amount of money based on 5% of their gross revenue. And so we don't take any equity, and we get a real-time payment back until they've paid us back a certain amount of money that we've agreed to they're going to pay us back. So it kind of looks like a loan, but it's not like a fixed monthly payment because it's based on a percentage of their gross revenue. We've also invested in some LLCs where we don't actually have equity, but we become a partner in the LLC, and all their profits and losses flow, year by year to the partners of the LLC. So that's basically how we look for returns.
Involved,
Go ahead.
I'll add that to the question. I spent a lot of time looking at program-related investments from foundations. There are a lot of very creative ways foundations are trying to deploy capital to these companies, and they're looking for very creative structure, just like Bob described, where it's a loan. They can maybe get repaid, but they're not trying to make a profit or return against it, but they're willing to take one. They're able to take one. I think is the right change. And so foundations may be another option for companies that aren't necessarily on an exit or IPO track.
Yeah. Foundations are basically nonprofits, and they, by charter, will donate 5% of their capital per year as a charitable contribution. The other 95% they can use to invest anywhere they want to maintain their capital base. And historically, they've invested in large, in public companies or stocks and bonds, but they can take some of that 95% and invest in startups also. And that's I believe that's the PRI portion of that. Is that right, Bart?
That's the MRI side, the mission-related investment.
So they can make grants, and they also can make investments in for-profit startups. And that's an interesting approach.
Yep.
Another question was, social impact. How do you measure the impact? That's a really interesting question, and we spent a lot of time thinking about that as an angel network. When we first started 5 years ago, we're not as rigorous as we are now. Now, when companies apply, we ask them to suggest impact measurements they can report to us on a quarterly basis. And if you know anything about, sort of the terminology of the theory of change, there's outcomes, which talk about activities. How many people did your product serve? And there's outputs, which is how many people did your product serve? And there's outcomes, is how did you change their lives? And it's easy for companies to measure their outputs. It's often much harder to measure their outcomes. And we do a whole webinar on measuring social impact. And there are various groups out there that help startups quantify and define their impact. But we ask them to convince us that there's efficacy in what they're doing, that there really will be an effect of impact. It's not just, oh, what a nice idea. That'll be a good thing to do for people, we think. Convince us that you have impact, and that you have, if you're addressing a specific problem, you have more impact than your competitors who are trying to address that same social challenge. And that you can, if you can't get revenue and be successful in the marketplace, there's no impact either. So, the business success and the impact success are tightly tied together. There's a question there for you, Bart.
Yeah, I think my last comment on the distinction between social impact and environmental impact, the measurement, I was trying to figure out, do I want to spend more time on social or environment? And the ability to measure progress was one of the reasons I liked the environment better. And the other side is the risk of failure. What happens if an environmental startup fails versus a social impact one, where suddenly now a human is having there's whatever positive thing happened gets taken away versus an environmental startup failed. And so that really I struggled with that for a while. Those are the two big distinctions that I find is much easier to deal with on the environmental side.
Right, and just building on what Bart just said, environmental side, you might talk about decrease in carbon footprint or conservation of resources or protecting from pollution of resources. If you have a mobile app that's supposed to help someone feel better about life and maybe deal with their PTSD or their depression, how do you measure that you've actually been the factor that caused their symptoms to get better? There can be 100 different things that influence their prognosis, right? As an individual dealing with these stresses. And how do you measure that? It's hard. Sometimes there's some surrogate data you can get from a secondary source that says these types of things really work well with PTSD. We're going to make them more available, easy to access, more automated. Yeah, so that you can make stories around that. There's a question here, Bart. What are some of the resources in Austin that are available to startups focusing on environmental impact? The
good news is there's more and more every day. Austin really is beginning to be one of the national leaders in this conversation. The obvious programs for startups, think about technology-oriented startups, Tarmac, ATI, Techstars, Mass Challenge, Capital Factory, a lot of those basic ones. If you're earlier stage and trying to figure out how to do research, one of the foundations, the Cynthia Mitchell Foundation, is here in town. They focus a lot on energy and water type topics, so it's a good resource. Pecan Street has a massive data set in energy, transportation, and beginning hopefully on soil. They collect something like 1 billion data points a day on how we use electricity in our homes. And they make all that data available to researchers and academics. So that's another potential route for you to go learn some of that on. You're starting to see more conversation about the publicity for it on Austin Startup Week. Last year, we ran an entire track on the climate side and sustainability. And it's becoming a much more dominant conversation throughout the technology, the startup ecosystem. Those are the first ones. Let me know if there's something specific you're seeking. The related question that's coming through is how are environmental impact startups staying connected during COVID? And I was going to think about resources, and resources being the people. And it's kind of hard to go find the people now to come join your startup because of everyone's social distancing, and it's not online as much anymore. And so it is taking more effort for those individuals who are interested in a sector to be connected, and through events like this one, or a lot of one-off behind-the-scenes conversations. Yeah,
and I would just add that in terms of how COVID's affecting investors, we're doing everything virtually. We were largely virtual before in our network. We have a few in-person meetings that have gone virtual, but the one thing we miss the most is having a sort of a final meeting with the founding team and kind of doing a little bit of a stress test. We ask the CFO hard questions and see how the CEO responds, things like that. That part is missing, but other than that, we're still operating and investing and doing all the things we've always done.
Yeah. I'd say at ATI, I get invited to your version of a partner meeting, a final pitch meeting. I get invited to a lot of theirs, and they pause for the first 3-4 months of COVID, and then realize we just got to move forward. And so they've admitted several companies the last several months focus on impact aspect. And so everyone's getting back to it, which is good news.
Yeah, so the question was, how are we doing individually? So I'm excited about, I started this network with 6 angels back in January of 16. We're now 49. And we just opened up a Dallas chapter. We've invested $5.5 million. We just continue to grow and do well. We're under the umbrella, Austin, if you want to be an angel in Austin, you think CTAN. And CTAN I view as this big oak tree and we're this little sapling coming up under their shade, trying to get a little sunlight. But we're doing really well. We're growing, and we have a lot of recognition at the national level. We're probably the third largest impact angel network in the country now. So I'm excited.
Yeah, and to everyone out there, I can't overstate how important it is to have a dedicated group of investors. When I've done fundraising for my own startups, whether they're for-profit or for the nonprofits I founded, having a knowledgeable investor or grantor was just made worlds of difference. The amount of education time I've had to spend with investors who didn't understand the space or the technology, it's crushing, and they rarely do invest. So having investors who are knowledgeable, passionate, and interested in it is really going to make a huge difference for our community.
And while I spoke about social impact and let Bart speak about environmental stuff, the Southwest Angel Network, last year, half our investments were in clean tech, and the majority of the others were in healthcare. We've done some for social justice, for fintech, for education, but we seem to be getting the most interesting deals and people trying to improve health outcomes and protecting the environment. And so that actually lines up very nicely with ATI's, I think, focuses. And if you think about Texas in general, Texas has a huge healthcare infrastructure. Texas Medical Center in Houston Medical Center, Texas Medical Center is the largest one in the world. 17 hospitals in a very small area. And we have so much energy stuff going on in Texas, primarily, petroleum based, but moving, we're big solar farm installations in Texas. And so healthcare and environmental are sort of natural places for startups in Austin and Texas to be at from the impact point of view.
Yeah, on the oil and gas side, I'm part of a group focused on geothermal energy at the University of Texas. UT does the most research in energy in the country. And so the folks at UT know how to drill very deep holes. And so we're trying to figure out how to redirect a lot of that capability towards geothermal, which could be provide clean, safe energy around the world in many places, aside from like Iceland, and kind of everywhere else that has potential for it as well. So it's good to see the broader Texas industry sector start to focus on this.
Yeah, and ATI just established the Texas Global Health Security Consortium, which is focused on, one of their big initiatives is dealing with the pandemic right now. And so they're bringing together universities and startup companies and public companies trying to address these big health security issues. And so that's another example of, infrastructure here in town that's interesting, part of ATI.
Yep.
The question was, will we share our slide decks? Be glad to. I don't know how to best do that. Maybe Brittany or someone can tell us how to orchestrate that.
But sure, yes, we'll get it out there.
Add our email addresses now. Yes. So should folks basically just email us for the slide decks, I guess? Is that how this is going to work? And I think Janice is going to join us again.
Great.
Hi, everybody. I am back. Bob, Bart, thank you so much. This was very enlightening and a really great depiction of the Austin social impact scene, whether it's through angel networks, accelerators, community groups. You really highlighted the robust and diverse nature of the social impact scene here. And as you said, we're on the rise and ahead of the curve, and it's very clear to see why. I've participated in the Mass Challenge Accelerator, big supporter of Div Inc. I'm a Notley Fellow for this year and the following year. So I've seen a lot of this social impact at work, and it's great that you're able to highlight those. For those of you interested in connecting with Bart or Bob, Bob's email address is bob.bridge@swanimpact.org. And you can reach Bart Bon at bbon, B-O-H-N, at pecanstreet.org.
And Janice, you're one of the founders of the Austin chapter of Black Women Talk Tech, I think.
Yes, I am. I appreciate that allyship and advocacy. Yes, so I'm the Austin chair for Black Women Talk Tech, the nation's largest Black women's tech organization. So whether you're a founder or a woman in the tech space or an ally that supports the advancement of Black women in technology, I encourage you to attend one of our monthly events as well. So we have just under 10 minutes for session number 2. That'll kick off at 1:45 p.m. Central. So thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bart, again. And we're just going to adjourn for a short break. So 1:45 p.m. and we will see you soon.